Research into the reasons behind the establishment of St Edward's Church by Earl Beauchamp at the beginning of the 20th century led to some interesting discoveries about the history of a house that stands diagonally opposite its lych gate. John O'Keefe stumbled across the story.
I just came across the fact that there'd been a pub at the Hollies. So I looked back, way back. It had always been in the hands of tradespeople. There'd been a waggoner lived there. Interesting, there was a leather worker lived there for 2 generations. But in the late 1800s, it became an alehouse and then a pub. Then when the Earl built the church, he bought the pub.
But before we go into what the Earl did with the pub and why, let's go back to the beginning of the story John uncovered. Deeds held at Madresfield Court, home of the Beauchamp family, suggest that Little Adams was built in the early 1600s. It was probably built by or for Eli Hall, a Dimmock shoemaker, who acquired the site, once part of Powell's End Farm, somewhere between 1613 and 1621. The house came with a small parcel of land, and would be considered today as a small holding. He soon sold the house on to John Hall, a mason from Woolhope, who in turn sold it to Thomas Holder from Newent. Thomas Holder, also known as Thomas Merry, is described as a cordwainer. This indicates he was a member of the Cordwainers' Guild, a craftsman shoemaker creating luxury footwear from fine new leather, not to be confused with a mere cobbler, who at that time mainly renovated old shoes, recovering usable leather to make replacements. It's likely that the modern term to cobble something up or to cobble together has its origins in this distinction. The Great Plague of 1665 caused great changes in house ownership throughout England during the following years. Little Adams was sold to John Davis of Upton Bishop in 1756 and finally taken into the Beauchamp estate in 1869. Around the 1840s, Edmund Wintle was living there. By 1851, he'd opened a beer shop, and by 1861 had turned it into the Cross Keys Inn. His son William took on the role of landlord and inherited the property on his father's death. Mary, William's wife, died in 1861, leaving the marriage childless. By 1871, his nephew, William Hopkins, had joined him at the Cross Keys, and he inherited the inn on his uncle's death. He didn't enjoy the position for long, as in 1898 the 6th Earl Beauchamp decided to close all the inns in the village, formal and informal. Local parish records, journals kept by successive vicars of the period, show that in 1899 the inn was converted into a club for the men of the parish. Coming as it did only 4 years before St Edward's was completed, one's bound to wonder whether this was part of a strategy to stem the drift to nonconformism in the village. The Kempley living was in the gift of the Earl, and his brother Edward Ligon attended the club opening. A promise was made to repair the inn for club use, and the handsome sum of £100 was spent to practically rebuild the premises.
And you can see how this fits in with building the church, trying to pull people away from the Baptists.
And closing the pubs in Kempley wasn't the only step that was taken against the demon drink, as John O'Keefe found when he dug a little deeper into the local archives.
There's a very strong anti-alcohol theme runs through what the Earl was doing, and indeed the High Churchmen that paraded down at St Mary's and then at St Edward's. And that led me to look at quite a lot of leases from the Earl's estate. And in many of them, quite a few, there is a clause that forbids alcohol on the premises. It's in there, in the deed. You can't have alcohol, which since they're all drinking cider like crazy, is quite mad.
After its turn of the century renovation, Little Adams was among the properties auctioned off by the 7th Earl Beauchamp in 1919. By the new millennium, it was known as the Hollies, but the long tradition of its occupants plying a trade continued, with a gardening business being run from the house.